guys so much for having me in. Can you hear me okay? Is that all right? All right, wonderful. Well, my name is Brece Clark, and I'm going to talk today about horses. I'm really excited to offer this kind of a story-like experience with you today because not a lot of people get the opportunity to come full circle. About 3 years ago, I was faced with a pretty big dilemma. I was starting to learn about animal rights and this kind of vegetarian, vegan ideal, and I could kind of go two ways. I could either listen to this gnawing thing in the back of my head, or I could, just kind of continue to do what I was always doing, which is something that I've done my entire life, which is train horses. I'm now a humane educator and an animal caretaker at Sasha Farm Animal Sanctuary in Manchester, Michigan. My life is kind of focused around caring for those beings and kind of giving them their right to freedom and their right to individuality back to them. But most of my life has been centered around this ideology that animals are here for us to use, and that could never be more present than it is in riding horses.
We're having trouble hearing you.
A little bit.
Can you turn it up?
Okay, just turn it there. Cool. Alright, so to give you kind of a background story, I grew up training horses, but really I just started off riding them kind of bareback in the field. I was just barefoot, kind of grungy kid that spent most of his summers just being around the horses. I learned a lot from these horses of just existing with them. I learned that horses prefer to have things their own way, and they prefer to just kind of do their own thing. They taught me that they have a complex language that I could never be a part of. I could sit with them all day and they would kind of accept me into their group, but I could never really understand the intricacies of their language. One flicker of a ear could send a signal, 20 horses deep. Some horses express their discomfort of being ridden and controlled more than others. For example, we had a horse named Mindy. Mindy was a Palomino, and she was the slowest, laziest, most docile horse you've ever met. She would walk slow, eat slow, and to train her was a breeze. It only took about 2 weeks, and she was what we would call babysitter or bomb-proof. I have a story of her when I was showing in fair, and I was just learning how to gallop, which for a little kid around 9 years old was a big thing. But Mindy wasn't a professionally trained, finished horse. She could just gallop real, kind of fast and not with real collection. So I'm kind of zipping around this arena, going as fast as I can possibly go, trying to get her to gallop. She's trot, 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 trot. And it was a lot of tension on the saddle, and my balance started to slip, and I started to go side, 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 and then I dropped into the in the dirt. And everyone's like, "Stop your horses," and my parents came running out, and everyone's, this little kid just fell. And what did Mindy do? Well, she just sat there, she looked at the grass and started eating. And everyone was so, they really respected Mindy for that, and they started saying things like, "Mindy really took care of you that day." A lot of horses would have run away, but she looked at you on the ground and said, "Well, there's my human," and just kept eating. But I didn't believe that. I didn't think that was really what Mindy was doing. I think Mindy was just super food motivated and didn't particularly care no matter what. But it kind of brings apart this concept that we have that animals are more than kind of what they are. She didn't necessarily, I don't believe, take care of me in the way that they were kind of explaining it. So let's start by beginning by looking at a little bit of the domesticated horse from the earliest of times, a little history. See, horses disappeared from the Western Hemisphere during the Ice Age, around 8000 BC. But small numbers survived throughout Eurasia. And archaeology has shown us that they were first domesticated by a group of people called Batai people, who lived in the Eurasian steppes, also known as Kazakhstan today. They often herded these horses, and they used them for food. We also have found in the fossil evidence that they would, some of their bones had knife marks through them, so we know that they were using them for food. They also drank the milk from the mares, known as pumice, which is fermented mare's milk, so we know that they were using them for that purpose too. They probably weren't riding them at this point. The horses stood no taller than around 13 hands high, which is about an average size for a pony. So more than likely, they were just a form of sustenance for them. From the Bataille horses, which is this leopard spotted horse here, we believe they bred that spotted color into them. That gave birth to the Przewalski horse, which, for those of you that know anything about the Przewalski horse, we originally thought that that was the original horse of modern day horses today. But in 2018, there was a new finding. They were able to sequence the genomes and found that the Przewalski horse is not a truly feral horse, it's not a truly wild horse, but rather a descendant from this domesticated horse that the Bataille people did. They're also not a ancestor to the modern horse today, which is interesting. We don't have any evidence of where modern horses got their origin. So it sort of seemed to be like a branch where the Bataille horse, Przewalski horse, they ended, and then we have this modern horse lineage. The invention of the wheel and kind of led to this introduction of the chariot, a vehicle that carried two men, typically, one controlling the horse that pulled it, the other an archer fighting from a moving platform. It's more common, the historical kind of theologians, they think that we actually did the chariots first rather than riding them first. They think that came before them. But in around 1000 BC, we invented the saddle, which really changed the way that human civilization progressed. Without the horse, we wouldn't be where we are today. Horses in the United States first came back. They were reintroduced after they were extinct during the Ice Age in 1493 by Columbus. These horses that he and Cortez brought over, they originally brought them to Mexico, and they started this breeding program there. But some of those horses escaped, and that's where the American Mustang was kind of founded. The American Mustang that we all know today, running loose throughout some of the Western Plains. And of course, some of these horses were then snatched up by Native Americans, though some of the historical books tell us that they were stolen. But I think because their land was being taken, that they kind of had a right to take some of those horses. And of course, the Native Americans used them for everything, and it improved their success in trade, battles, farming, and of course hunts, especially bison hunts. We know that war has been a central theme in the story of man, and the role of the horse is vital to that story as well, maybe even as important as written language. Every war prior to World War I used horses either for hauling weapons, used in the cavalry, or for transporting mail. In the First World War alone, World War I, 8 million horses died in combat. The death toll for military men, to give you perspective, was between 9 and 11 million. Of course, the dominant use of horses changed after the steam engine, which not surprisingly was measured in horsepower. Telegraphs and railroads replaced the Pony Express, which of course carried letters across the American West. But what about horses today? What about those feral horses? In 1971, the Wild Burros and Free Roaming Act was implemented by Richard Nixon to protect some of these wild, free-roaming horses. Some of the populations couldn't recover by the time that act began. As of March 2016, there were 67,000 horses and burros on public lands in the U.S. and 24,000 in government holding pens. Sadly, the Bureau of Land Management has kind of given us an estimate that 26,000 is what they would recommend being on the plains. Now, you might think that, okay, maybe they have an argument there. Maybe there is an overpopulation of wild horses. However, the cattle industry, livestock out in the West, outnumber horses 50 to 1. So a lot of activists will claim, well, it's not the horses that are using the majority of the land, it's this cattle industry, and that should be addressed first. So now we have the modern horse, and today there are roughly 9.5 million horses in America, which is most of anywhere in the world. Let me throw some USDA numbers at you. Out of the 9.5 million, 4 million are used for recreational purposes like riding. 3 million are for the show arenas, $2 million for other activities like rodeo, polo, police work, etc. And then there's around 850,000 that are used for racing. There's over 350 different breeds, from the quarter horse that originated out west due to their stocky size, to the draft horse for pulling things, the Arabian with their sleek, slender body type, and of course the thoroughbred that we know so well. One thing that I want to point out is that most of us get our understanding of horses from movies. How many of you have seen these movies before? One or two of them at least. They're kind of iconic movies that we grew up with. The problem is that time and time again, Hollywood has to romanticize the version of the horse that we see. It's a fictitious narrative that makes horses seem as if they like to be ridden or they desire to be ridden. I'll be the first to admit that I'm a sucker for these movies. I'll still watch them today. But it's sort of like magic. It's Hollywood movie magic. And what is the one thing that we know about magic? The very basic understanding of watching a magic act is that it's not real, right? It's somebody trying to get you to believe in something that isn't actually the case. That rabbit didn't come out of the hat. In the same breath, I, as a horse trainer, was no more a horse whisperer as Robert Redford. Horses, of course, are creatures of beauty, and that's kind of why we romanticize them. Beauty may be in the eye of the beholder, but they've inspired poets and artists all throughout the ages. Some of the best times growing up were around horses for me. They're fun, right? It's an awesome activity to be a part of if you're kind of a little kid, especially growing up in the country. One of the things that I loved as a kid was I used to have neighbors that were living down the road, and we would call each other up on the phone and we'd say, hey, do you want to meet up to ride? And so they'd say, sure. So hang up the phone, go saddle your horse, and then we would meet halfway down the road. And we'd play cowboys and Indians, and we'd experience nature by riding through the trails. It was amazing. It was like one of my best childhood memories. We would even race down the road. Of course, you never wanted to be behind the fastest horse because the rocks would kick up in your face. And we would ride to the Amish cheese house that was down the road. Most of all, though, I think horses give us a sense of belonging. They don't care if you're president of a company or, a janitor in a school. You receive their unconditional love, and that's sort of what all animals offer us. Just to quote Pat Brown, she says, a horse is the projection of people's dreams about themselves, strong, powerful, beautiful, with the capability of giving us escape from our mundane existence. So now let's take a look at some of the different training methods. Coming from this industry, I'm able to offer insight that most people never get the opportunity to see. There's a reason that when you get your horse trained, you drop them off at the trainer, and then you don't see them for 30 days. You're not a part of that training process, so most people say, my horse loves to be ridden. We have a great time together. Who are you to tell me that this horse doesn't want this? But they didn't see how the horse became in such a submissive state. So let me just kind of go through some of these. The very first training method started off during the West, kind of the cowboy expansion. And this was used to pull cattle off the range, right? It is fear-based. It's a position of domineering force, and you use physical violence to get them to do what you want them to do. We have exploited every part of their body that is sensitive, from their chin, where they have these nerve endings that are very sensitive. We use chains there. Of course, the inside of their mouth, the top of their head, called the poll, is sensitive. These images that I'm going to show next, they are kind of difficult to see, but they are the reality today. Let me just give you a little background. When I was doing this when I was a kid, it was a big moral dilemma for me. I didn't express it to anybody, but I was going through a lot of confusion in my head. See, I think of it kind of like a bipolar scenario. On the one hand, we love our horses. We say oh, I take great care of them, I give them their oats and a place to lay their head at night. And on the other hand, we say, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to hurt you. So it kind of is, it's opposite ends of kind of how we would kind of care for somebody. But the cowboy way was a rough life, right? And so their training methods were just as rough, and that was translated in some of these measures, such as laying them down, tying their legs together like a hog tie, and creating sores inside their mouths. Whether we listen or not, horses communicate their needs, wants, and desires regularly. At the core of its foundation, the idea of training a horse is to get them to remove their instinct to be a prey animal, to flee, and to get them to accept this foreign person on their back who controls everything about them. And they're 1,200 pounds. You know, I'm probably not much past 150. So in my horse training experience, these measures usually came around 2 weeks after the training process started. We called it the honeymoon phase. The first 2 weeks, they really wouldn't put up much of a challenge, and you didn't really see the true colors of the horse until they started to offer you all these no's, no's, no's. I don't want to do this. And at that point, you had to really test their strength of will, and sometimes these measures were necessary. Events inspired by the rugged cowboy way of life are rodeo events like barrel racing, bronc riding, calf roping, and steer wrestling. All of these, I used to love to be a part of. I used to love to barrel race my horse. And I occasionally would carry around a lasso and rope my brother's leg. But looking at these pictures, this is a long ways away from I love my animals. Can you see the inconsistency? Even going so far as taking a young calf and feeling like you have to drag them to the ground and show your manhood. One theory I have is that we romanticize the past. Our elders, we respect them, they're older than us, so we tend to model our behavior after what people have done before us. And sometimes the morals change. Morals are always kind of evolving. The most dangerous phrase in the human language is we've always done it this way. One could argue that back then, this was a necessity for their way of life, that maybe we wouldn't have gotten to where we are today without, treating animals this way. But I'm not concerned about that. What justification do we have to do it today? That's what matters, right? It's not, we can't use what people do in times of necessity to dictate our, moral justification for treating animals the way we do today. In this case, using them for entertainment and pleasure for no other apparent reason, I don't see the consistency. This is what they call the pain face. I would work a horse until I got this face. This face shows me that they have resigned, they have given in. For example, when I had a horse that was called barn sour, this is where you take them out riding and all they want to do is run back to the barn. They don't want to be out there. There's this phrase in the training world called make the wrong thing hard and the right thing easy. So once they got back to the barn, I would say, okay, you want to go back to the barn? No problem. Then I would run them into the dirt when I got back to the barn, trying to teach them that just because you're back at the barn doesn't mean you get to be put away or you get your hay and it's your private stall. I would run them until there was so much sweat dripping on their face that the sweat was pouring in their eyes. They had this foam under their saddle blanket. Their eyes kind of giving me that begging for mercy look, and their nostrils were dilated. When we're working with them and they say no, don't want to do it. Sorry, pal. We take it as offensive. We say, how dare you do this to me? All you gotta do is do what I want. And it forms this kind of combative relationship of the horses against us. And you see this reflected in the language. you'll hear horsemen say, oh, that horse is really stubborn, or that horse is a jerk, or mean, or she needs a job. You hear that a lot. And I think when we do that, there's no other way than become violent, when you kind of pit each other against one another. But there is a new way of training called the natural horsemanship method. And you see some of the trainers nowadays using this method. I too kind of started to use this natural horsemanship method early in my 20s. Right about that time, I was really questioning the way that we use animals, either in food, clothing, or entertainment. Maybe you can relate to this. I had seen a factory farm video for the first time, and it was appalling. I couldn't believe that this was going on and no one was talking about it. So that kind of was the catalyst for thinking about horse training differently. At that time, I also went vegetarian, and probably like you, I got a lot of hazing for it. I can remember sitting around the table with my uncle, and he said, I love animals, and yeah, PETA, they're a good organization. That stands for, what is it? People eating tasty animals? Okay, insert eye roll, thanks, Uncle Gary. So this way of training horses is more about being in a more harmonious balance with them. You don't want to use a whole lot of violence. But ironically, this is Clinton Anderson. He's one of the biggest names in the natural horsemanship field. Ironically, he's been kicked off a lot of different clinics and kicked out of shows for being so aggressive with his horses. It seems to be a little bit of a show. Even Buck Brannaman, he made his millions with a documentary called Buck. And you've seen that on Netflix. He said, think of the horse as your partner, and it's all one great dance. That's not to say it's always going to be easy or you won't go through issues. But when a horse is troubled or uncomfortable in our world, rather than show contempt for him, you must demonstrate empathy and work to convince him that you mean him no harm. We can dissect this and kind of go through the double standards here. First of all, one great dance. Well, if I'm dancing with somebody, I would hope that it's a mutual, both parties want to engage in this activity. Horses don't have a choice, so it's not a dance in that respect. When they're troubled or uncomfortable, rather than show contempt for them, you must demonstrate empathy. Well, we know that empathy is placing yourself in the shoes of someone else, right? Seeing the world from their point of view. From their point of view, would you want to be controlled and manipulated and be, sort of violently attacked for saying no when you don't want to do something? So I don't think that's true. And then mean him no harm is the biggest contradictory of all. Because that's the premise, is that if they don't do said behavior, pain will be inflicted. And in fact, here's a picture of Buck Brannaman at one of his clinics, where he tied their legs together. So at this point, I kind of started to see it as a sham, this natural horsemanship thing. Yes, I agree with causing less harm, but they sort of sold it in a nice little package of love and trust and respect. But we're still doing things I wasn't comfortable with. Here's some pictures of common horse disciplines. So Tennessee walking horses, reining world. Earlier I showed you that picture of the pain face. Look at the faces of all four of these horses. Can you see it? Can you see the resigned look? It's easy to look at the human and say, oh, but that, especially with kids, oh, but that kid's having such a good time, they're enjoying themselves. And I get that, we tend to empathize with our own species first. But there's also someone else, and someone. Animals aren't things, they're not people, but they're feeling beings. And so I think that they're lost in this kind of seeing the whole picture. Of course, we're familiar with the racing industry and other exploited uses of horses that most people don't think twice about. Racing may seem harmless, but the thoroughbred racing industry send 10,000 horses to slaughter annually. Meaning of the 20,000 foals born every year into the racing world, half of them will be sent to be killed for their flesh. Horse slaughter was banned in the US in 2006, and since then, the exports to Mexico has gone up 660%, and Canada 148%. They're still sending animals to other countries to be slaughtered. When we were training horses, we had this guy named Bones. Yes, that was his name, Bones. And his name actually kind of fit him. He was the guy that everyone in the area would call when you had what we would call junk horses. Horses that either had a defect in some way. Maybe they were too old, maybe they had a wonky leg, weren't suited for riding, nobody wanted them. And I will never forget, we had 4 horses that someone just gave us, and we didn't have time for them, couldn't find homes for them, so we sent them to Bones, and he crammed 15 horses in this rickety old trailer. And the way they went, I never thought twice about them. So is it all about the ego? I think so. In primitive, pre-literate clans where there was virtually no economic surplus, there was always sharing of land and resources and products and labor. So that shows us that we have this capacity for love and sharing, whereas the capacity for aggression and cruelty only shows up once there's some sort of economic surplus, but not enough for the whole tribe or nation. Some historians would argue that the greatest measurement of wealth was measured in cattle. In fact, the word livestock literally translates to live money. So I'd like to pose this question to you next. You see this guy standing on top of these horses, and he's demonstrating how strong and powerful he is. Their horses aren't even, bridled, and he's got complete submission there. What is the ethical difference between that and this? I also see a man demonstrating his egotistical nature over an innocent life. It's an interesting thought, right? Public opinion around elephants used in circuses has drastically changed in America in the last few decades. So much so that in 2017, Ringling Brothers completely closed their doors. And this was mostly due to the public outcry of some of these training methods that were being exposed and just seeing it from the elephant's point of view. The next images might be kind of difficult to see. The training methods for elephants is very, very similar to the training methods for horses. This concept of taking an animal from the wild, which horses initially were, and this was often done by shooting the mother and taking the baby, and then you indoctrinate that baby into your kind of way of life. There's also similarities between making them lay down in full submission there. You saw that earlier with the horse. Using bull hooks, not much different than crops and whips. And even things like hobbles, where we tie their feet together. Horses and elephants experience that. The reason that I think this is so non-acceptable and the measures of riding horses and using them is that we're more emotionally connected to these horses because more people have them. How many people do you know have an elephant in their backyard? And also, it's been grandfathered in because it's been done for decades. And like we mentioned, we really revere sort of, American heritage. We find it acceptable, but yet this isn't. There's a little bit of a deception here. This is kind of the iconic stance from a horse, right? The rearing up on their hind legs. I used to, pine over Roy Rogers and Hilo Silver out of the Lone Ranger. But truth be told, horses only demonstrate this act in the wild when they're fighting. Sometimes you'll see it in young colts when they're playing. And you may think it's harmless, but don't be fooled. The technique that is done to get horses to rear is by pulling so intensely on the bit that the horse has nowhere else to go but feel like they have to rear up. So look a little closer and you would see that the horse is experiencing some pretty intense pain. The other way of achieving the rear is by cracking the front legs with a whip, as you see this guy doing here. And the horse rears up to avoid that out of fear. To me, all I see are two men who are saying, "Look how much I can control this giant animal. Look at me being a strong man." And again, how is that much different than making elephants perform the same disgraceful act? So while horses have been maybe domesticated longer than elephants, they haven't lost their desire to be free. That much we haven't bred out of them. But what we love about animals, and horses especially, is that they run free and they have this beautiful, majestic nature about them and their free spirit. But what we love about them is actually what we take away by controlling them, by needing to have that power over them. And so the art form is sort of lost. So how do we get these prey animals to kind of submit to us? They're naturally afraid of everything. So they tend to respond to danger with a flight response. One time I was riding a pony when I was younger, and he bucked me off into a wooden fence because I went to put on a swishy jacket. You know, the material made the noise he didn't like, and he ran away from it. So these are some of the measures of which we desensitize horses. The message being delivered here is run away if you want to, but it's not going to stop. I don't care if you're afraid, get over it. It would be kind of like if your biggest fear were snakes. In my case, it's June bugs. Terrified of June bugs. And it would be like if you're in a bathtub and somebody dumps 100 snakes on top of you and says, get over it, it'll be fine, they won't hurt you. And every time you said, no, I can't do it, I'm too afraid, you tried to get out, they punched you in the face. That's kind of what these horses are experiencing. So they're saying, you can be afraid of it, but actually the fear of me is worse than the stimulus, than the ball or the bags or the tarp. So there are a couple of ways in which we control this 1,200-pound animal, and primarily this is done through the bit. Bits have three primary purposes: control direction, reduce speed, cause pain for discipline actions, and tilt their head for what's called collection, which is what you see there. These bits exploit the bars, the corners of their mouth, it pinches their tongue, and places pressure on the pole. There's also leverage bits. Honestly, there's more bits than there are breeds of horses these days, but leverage bits have a long shank so that you get, let's say you put 5 pounds of pressure on the bit, you're going to get 10 pounds in return. The racing world, a lot of right-hand corner uses tongue ties. These are used to improve racing performance. Some bits have multiple bits inside their mouth, like that one's a combination bit. So there's a shank and a snaffle inside. Then we also use spurs. Spurs are primarily used to push them forward or control direction. Bronc riders in the rodeo use big spurs, sort of like that one, to mark the front of the shoulders of the horse, and they get points for how much they spur the front shoulders. Really, the severity of these bits is more about the rider and how they use them. Maybe you've heard this before, but my horse likes to be ridden. Okay, I can see why they would think that. Sometimes the behavior of these horses may seem like they don't care, but in my opinion, this is just learned helplessness. After all, what choice do they have? Is there a way out? Many times horses are stalled most of the day, so they'll do anything to get out of that stall, even if it means carting around a little kid. They've learned that this is a sad reality for them, but it is their reality nonetheless. So horses and animals in general, they tend to live in the moment, right? Your dog or cat lives in the present. They do the same thing. This kind of idea of wants to be ridden is just their reality of accepting what their situation is. Kind of like Stockholm Syndrome, you know? And I'd throw in a little bit of humor. One of the most profound authors on this subject is Ren Hurst. If you haven't read this book and you're interested in this subject, it's a must-read. In the book, Writing on the Power of Others, she really explores this idea of codependency, meeting our needs through animals when we really should just be healing ourselves. This is a quote I pulled out of the book. Everyone I know claims to love their horse, but when you're really taking a good long look at what love is real, is putting a metal bit in the horse's mouth to control their love, is conditioning them to carry you around for your own enjoyment love, placing them in some kind of bondage whenever you want to spend time with them. Is that love? The turning point for me in my training experience was I was training these horses, Tennessee walking horses, in Ann Arbor. And and I had met a horse named Legend, and you can say that I met my match. He was this beautiful flaxen mane and tail Tennessee Walker, but he was extraordinarily strong-willed. His problem, he had many problems, but one of them was he would get barn sour. So every time we were out on the road, if he was alone, he would freak out. He would prance and dance and kick out and rear and run me into ditches, run me into mailboxes. And I tried everything to fix this horse, to reassure him that you're okay and no one's going to hurt you. I tried ponying another horse. I tried walking next to him. I tried offering treats when we were out there. I went kind of the other angle and got a more severe bit, tried to inflict more pain. But nothing seemed to work. And this went on for about 9 months. It was right about the time where I was really questioning animal rights and things like that. And I was sharing a lot of stuff on my social media about how meat is murder, and I was really into it, and I was judging everyone around me that's eating meat. The early stages before you kind of mature. But it all came to a halt sometime in October. Legend was being his typical self, and he almost ran me into a car. He was backing up so uncontrollably that the car was trying to pass us, and we nearly got hit. And I was so mad at this horse. I had done everything I could to share with him that you were okay, I'm not here to hurt you. All you have to do is walk, dude. Just walk down the road. It wasn't hard. So the car went by, and I got off him, and I just unleashed every ounce of frustration and anger that had been built up over the last 9 months. I started seesawing on the bit and just ripping him and hitting him and kicking him, and just anger unloaded. And by the time that I stopped and caught my breath, I looked up, and his mouth was just dripping blood, so much so that the reins were soaked in it. And I asked myself, what the F am I doing? What am I doing? Why am I hurting this horse like this? For what purpose could I justify what I'm doing right now? He doesn't want to be ridden. Why can't I honor that? What is it about me that is so much needing to do this to him? So I apologized best I could to him, and I went up to reach and pet his face, and he jerked back. I just unleashed the wrath. And so I walked gently with him back to the barn, and I let him go. I tended to his mouth and all the cuts that were there. And when he left me, he ran back to his herd mates, and it just clicked. This is what they want. This is where they'd rather be. We haven't bred out of them the desire to be free. And from there, I had to give up riding horses. It was hard at first, and I've lost a lot of friends. I've lost family relationships. But I know that it is the right thing to do. To me, it falls under the same headlines as gay rights, human rights, animal rights. They're all fought on the same fronts. They're all living beings, and they possess a desire to live, love whom they choose, and desire to live free from brutality and oppression. The reason that I'm talking about it today in different events is it's my truth. I want to bring truth to the world. A lot of people don't get the opportunity to hear it from somebody who lived that life. Number 2 is I want to bridge the gap between veganism and horsemanship. Sometimes it gets cloudy, and it's a gray area. So I just want to help people reach a point like I did, where they start to see animals as victims of an oppressive, systematic, violent way of caring about them. Number 3 is just for my own self-gratification, to clear my conscience. So thank you guys for being my therapist today. Number 4, I'm not here to blame, shame, or guilt anyone. If that's just not the way I think real change occurs. We're all on our own path, and this is where we're at. And I think just as we continue to question ethics, we'll get to a place where we consider animal rights in the same breath as we do, human rights. I'm not even here to tell people to stop riding horses. So I'm just here to inspire new thought. So where am I now? I now care for animals in a different capacity at Sacha Farm Animal Sanctuary, where we take care of over 300 different farmed animals, cows and goats, turkeys, pigs. We have several mini horses, lots of goats. These are 5 field calves. They're a little bit older than that now, but call them the Jersey 5, and a Gur ox named Bima. So, from June Carter Cash, the pig, and myself, thank you for listening today. My favorite quote I've ever read is, let's all just be one less person harming animals. Thank you. We can do a short Q&A if anybody has any questions. We've got a couple minutes for the next speaker.
Mike, who has a question for Brece? Do you have a website?
Not personally, but Sasha Farm does, sashafarm.org, and we have Facebook and Instagram as well.
Any questions? Yeah, let's bring this.
What's your favorite vegan food?
My fiance and her family and I are going to go to Brick Road Pizza.
Nice.
Oh,
Yeah.
Little shout out.
A little shout out. I wish, not to be that vegan, but I wish they'd get rid of some of their cheese items, go full veg, but I get everyone, it's on their journey. So we're probably going to go there. There's so many different options. I was just talking this morning about I have so much respect for those that went vegan 30 years ago, and they went vegan for the animals because there was probably your case, right? Back then, there's hardly any
We
good options.
chewed bark and we left.
Yeah, today, gosh, because there's a substitute for that flavor that you grew up with. If you grew up with meat, eggs, or dairy, it's so easy. Beyond Burgers, plant-based ice cream, plant-based cheese, but back then I get that it was a little harder. I do love the Impossible Burger, though I know it's not a health food. Any other questions?
Where's Sasha Clark?
In Manchester. So it's about 2 hours, maybe a little less from here, just east of Jackson, between Jackson and Ann Arbor. Real small town. It's on about 80 acres, and it's been around since the 80s. Dorothy and Monty Jackson started it, a long time ago, but they actually were raising goats. They milked goats there, and then went vegetarian after they had to kill their first animal, and then people just kind of started bringing them animals because they knew they wouldn't eat them. That was a big thing. So now it's this amazing organization. We have over 30 different volunteers, and it's become quite a little organization. I'm very proud of it.
Brece.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for a good gift, you can adopt an animal as a gift for someone from Sasha Farm, which I do for my best friend's sons every year.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, we're kind of at capacity right now in terms of taking in animals, because there's so many that we're all caring for. But we have a lot of them that need sponsors still. So if you're interested in sashafarm.org, you can go through some of the animals and pick which one kind of speaks to you, and then there's a monthly sponsorship that you can be a part of.
If everyone stopped riding more than horses and the whole industry starts, what would happen to all horses?
That's a good question. What would happen to the industries if we all stopped riding horses? I don't see this as a thing that's going to happen tomorrow. This is a brand new thought that anyone is really even speaking out that horse riding could be unethical or maybe not in alignment with our progressive moral values. And I think it'll be just like the vegan movement. As people stop participating in it, less animals will be bred, and we'll get to a place where we can kind of live more in alignment with these values of nonviolence. Horses can live in the wild. We've seen that all of the horses that are out there now are former domesticated horses that undomesticated themselves. Not to say that the 9.5 million that we have right now are going to be able to roam freely. But yeah, I just think it'll be a slow transition to getting people to question their ethics, and from that point, influence the industries. I don't think it's going to be a top-down approach. I think it's going to be kind of the consumer level.
Brece, are you familiar with the Pirelli training?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a little more kinder?
It is, and I also want to make clear that there is kind of a gradient here. There is like the Pirellis and Buck Brennamans of the world, and then there's more of the traditional, rough and tough. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't be as kind as possible if you're going to participate in riding them. If you're going to put the animal in that situation, we should be as kind as possible. I think where we differ is, I suppose, I'm more of an abolitionist. I can't find any justification for making them be my, quote, slave. I don't know, that's a triggering word, but to make them do something for me simply for my entertainment, when I know that they wouldn't choose it for themselves. So it's kind of this animal rights position.
And do you know how, and I know in Arizona, many horses run free, and how are we doing with keeping that safe for those who live that way?
The controversy around that is that they're in such competition with the cattle industry. So the public rangelands are primarily used for grazing cows. So the horse numbers are growing, and it's interfering with their business for the meat industry. So they're pulling off horses from the range and sending them to different parts of the world, and they're in holding pens and things like that. But yeah, we need to just consider it not from a dominance point of view, but what's best for the entire ecological balance. And we know that cattle are not that. I mean, cattle are and they aren't native here. At least we can say that horses once lived here, and you could live in balance there. But cattle, they're not meant to be in North America.
Any more questions? Available just afterward too. One more round of applause to Brece. Stick around. We'll be back at this at high noon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you sure? Let's just double check.